Podcasts are ruining America.
Dun, dun, dun. Folks like Media Matters and New York Times, and really what I see is a boys' club.
Polling shows that people don't trust the media. And he says they don't trust the media for two reasons. He says they don't trust the media because they have a negative perception of the media, and they effectively, they don't believe the media is telling the truth.
Narrative has been utterly blown up by podcasts, but specifically, podcasts are free to blow up the narrative because Elon Musk bought X. And he says it's the Wild West. You can say whatever you like and people can community note it, but we're going to leave it up.
Well, but this is this has been the American spirit since America was constructed. Yeah. The notion of the power of the people, truly, and that power is most expressed in your freedom to speak.
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Our topic for you today is podcasts are ruining America.
Dun, dun, dun.
So this is inspired by a couple things, but specifically this New York Times article that has just dropped. And we'll get to that in just a second. But first, we are the Pop Culture Contrarian. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you find your podcasts. Make sure to hit that bell button so you know when we upload a video or audio, depending on how you experience us. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And, tell us who's crazy. It's probably me, but sometimes it's Andrew.
Yes, Thomas is the pinnacle of sanity.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So make sure you do that. And we're going to go ahead and get to our topic here, which is podcasts are ruining America. So earlier this week, so we are here in the past, before the election happens. When you listen to this, the election will have already happened. You'll know the results, hopefully.
Maybe.
We really hope.
We hope so.
If you don't, it's probably not a good sign, but anyhow, we're stuck here not knowing what's going to happen. And so it's not a great time. We'd like to know.
That's what we'd like to know.
Anyhow, article just dropped today on New York Times, today being Halloween.
What are you going as for Halloween?
Talking about how election falsehoods take off on YouTube as it looks the other way.
Yes. AKA, hey, YouTube, censor conservatives. Hey, censor them. Censor them, YouTube.
That is exactly what they're saying. Yeah. The banner for this article features Tim Pool, Michael Knowles, Rudy Giuliani, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, and some other people who I don't recognize immediately. And Michael Knowles tweeted out that he's not even mentioned in this article.
How dare they?
So they just threw his picture on there.
How dare
He's in the center just to include him so he didn't feel left out, I guess. So there's other stuff to get to here, but let's start with the article. I just want to read this opening. In June 2023, YouTube decided to stop fighting the most persistent strain of election misinformation in the United States. The falsehood that President Biden stole the 2020 election from Donald J. Trump. Oh no, how dare YouTube stop censoring videos.
Wow. Amazing that YouTube was allowing some freedom of speech.
Right, exactly.
Clearly the New York Times is not a fan of free speech.
No. And when writing this article, they worked with data from Media Matters, which I think Thomas knows more about than I do. Founded by some guy you know about, Thomas.
Yeah. Surely they are very official and upright, and they're corporate, and you can totally trust them, right, Thomas?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think they were founded by David Brock, who is a Clinton associate or has worked longtime Clinton friend. And the sole purpose of Media Matters of America is an organization designed to effectively attack conservative media. Yeah, that's what it exists to do, and it doesn't do it credibly. Yeah. It has a lot of problems with credibility, how it frames things, how it sources things. And
kind of like
if you look at what the New York Times even kind of says about Media Matters, it kind of tries to effectively admit, yes, this is a biased organization or a partisan organization, as it puts it. Bias would be a better word.
But they say, but we double checked that what they linked to is real.
And it's like, of course, you can link to any videos. It has everything to do with context. We all know this. You can take facts. It's the old line from Mark Twain, right? Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
And we'll have the halftime statistics for you in a few moments.
You can take, right? You can take anything. It's all a matter of how you frame it.
I actually like the other Mark Twain line better, which is, politicians and dirty diapers need to be changed frequently and for the same reason?
I'm just going to change your diaper real quick, and then I'm going to come back with my friend Cable.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's very similar. So I think all this is leftists, which is what the New York Times is full of, objecting to the fact that there's people on the right, conservatives, or even really libertarians are in the center.
Yeah, you can't say Tim Pool's a
expressing
conservative.
opinions about
Libertarian.
right, about an election outcome that was an extraordinary election. 2020, we all know, because it was in the midst of a global pandemic. And as a result of that pandemic, different states had different measures. We do know that the number of ballots that were mailed in was record breaking, which is unusual. We know that mail-in is one of the most insecure ways of handling ballots.
Yeah, mainly due to voter verification.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I spoke about my experience with that on our episode last week about the election, so go back and watch that one.
So questions that have lingered, and because of what resulted with Donald Trump questioning the outcome of the 2020 election, it has created this narrative that's been cemented, or at least that the left media, mainstream media, have tried to cement into the culture, this framing that it was the most secure election in history, and yet there's these, quote, election deniers who refuse to accept the truth that this was the most secure election in history.
Yeah.
When the truth is, no, it wasn't the most secure election in history.
No.
There's a lot of questions of questionable behavior that happened. That doesn't mean that it didn't come out eventually correct. There's people that have some serious questions about elements that occurred during this election. There were definitely shenanigans. There was probably some fraud. Now, does that occur in every election to varying degrees? Probably does. But the notion that to question it is the dangerous thing, which is the framing of it,
and
is the problem, is that itself is what is most disturbing about this.
Yeah, and the claim that it's the most secure election in history it's just baseless.
Yeah.
Like, they completely made that idea up.
But what's your evidence?
Right.
Yeah.
What's your evidence that it's not the most secure election in history? Yeah.
Yes.
So you know what this represents to me, folks like Media Matters and New York Times and coming out with these allegations and then banding together, really what I see is a boys club.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
kind of what they represent. So to them, it's about, we get to control the narrative. If you're in the club, we're going to take care of you.
Yep. You have to play by our rules.
You play by our rules. And if you're on the outside, then we're going to destroy you. And I don't know that it's so much about the truth as it is what I just stated.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. There's an agreement of what we believe is the best thing or the best direction politically for the country. And, if you're in that club, these are the rules and these are the things we follow. And these are the narratives that we're going to promote. And that's exactly and the media, like you were and talking to you earlier before this, the media, much of the mainstream media has effectively become an element of that boys club.
Yeah. Well, I would say the boys club is the media. I don't know what it would be if it's not the media.
Well, and that's why
corporate media.
The politicians are what I would say the drivers of it.
And that's why you get instances like one example is January 6th in the Capitol Police and the deaths associated with that.
Yeah.
And those being quietly rolled back like, oh, we got that wrong.
Yeah.
And not saying any corrections or whatever.
Right.
We're just going to quietly roll that back. And ultimately not getting fact checked, not holding themselves to the standards of journalism and protecting one another. Because the same sorts of things that we find on the other side of this that are applied to independent conservative sources end up being disproportionately applied.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not even measures.
There's 1,001 ways in which we can point out the bias in their reporting. There's been in the vice presidential debate, they said they weren't going to fact check, and then they did fact check J.D. Vance. There's the Steele dossier, all the Russia collusion stuff, which was proven to be false. And then they years later were like, oh yeah, that wasn't true. And now, when Jake Tapper's pressed on it, it's like, no one would have believed that there was Russia collusion if you watched CNN, which they absolutely would have. And it's become such an issue that some of these newspapers especially are starting to kind of try to figure out how do we get some credibility back, because people don't believe them.
Yeah, the mainstream media, or the media in general, media and journalism in general,
legacy journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is at the lowest trust for Americans. It's just above the view that Americans hold of Congress. And so that's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, I can say from my own experience, thinking about, how I treat a news story from CNN or the Washington Post or New York Times, this election cycle compared to last election cycle, even my trust, which was pretty low last time, is way down from where it was. I just don't believe a word they say.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would argue that the media, the mainstream media, your news media, your big three news media channels of legacy media or networks, plus your cable and your print media, the vast majority of it in my lifetime has been left leaning.
Yeah,
to put it best. And it doesn't necessarily come out only in their editorials, which is very obvious.
Yeah.
But where you see it actually is in their hard news, in the way they frame things, what they cover, what they don't cover,
the language they use.
Here's the headline on Washington Post right this minute, and it exactly illustrates the problem.
Right.
Washington Post, which we'll get, there's more to talk about with Washington Post in just a second, but this headline: the economy is booming, but inflation is on voters' minds as election nears. And the fact is, I don't know about you guys, the economy's not booming for me.
Yeah.
And that's how most Americans feel, especially people who aren't in the upper class, that the economy is not booming. And the upper class is like, but look at Wall Street, the numbers are up. It's like, great, eggs are more expensive.
Yeah, people have less money. So how do you're trying to navigate, what they're looking at is they're looking at one metric, and then they're applying the metric and avoiding another metric that's a negative metric, and saying, or they're not entirely avoiding it. They're saying they mentioned inflation, right? But they're not seemingly admitting that it should be the other way around. It should be inflation is effectively limiting or suppressing the economy to such a degree that people aren't actually feeling it and aren't actually experiencing a growing economy, because the inflation has so gutted people's ability or people's finances. And so I think that is the story that they want to try to reverse. And that's where we say, well, there's a bias showing.
Yeah. So getting back to our main topic here, we've been illustrating for a second what the corporate media is like and how they have a clear bias, and it shows in every headline. And they're saying, you should trust us. You can't trust these podcasters. Because in just a moment, I'm going to read this Jeff Bezos article. These podcasters spread misinformation. They're unverified. They don't have all these esteemed journalists, with degrees from Yale and Harvard working for them.
Hence the name of our podcast.
The contrary.
This episode as well.
Yeah,
right?
Podcasts are ruining America.
Yeah.
So should I just read some of this Jeff Bezos article, get into that?
Well, I would point to it's not a very long article, but basically what's kind of funny is it's in response to the fact that the Washington Post, for the first time in roughly 50 years.
I think it was a little bit less, but yeah.
Roughly 76, they gave their first or second endorsement in history. And they've continued that practice effectively all the way till this election, where Bezos said no endorsement of a candidate this year. And
the kerfuffle was he said it just before they were ready to publish their endorsement of Kamala.
Right. He stopped the editorial board endorsing Kamala. And for clarity, since 76, the Washington Post has endorsed for the president, the Democrat, every single time.
I thought in H.W. Bush's election, they didn't endorse. I think that's the one they didn't endorse.
In 88, they did not endorse.
Yeah.
That was the only election they refrained from endorsement. They didn't endorse him. They just didn't endorse. And so since 76, when they endorsed, now they have endorsed one Republican in history.
I don't even know who that was.
And that was Eisenhower.
Eisenhower, really recent.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't think it was Eisenhower. I got it wrong. I think it was Nixon 72.
Oh, okay. Let's see if
double check that. It might. No, I might be wrong. There was Republican. It's either Eisenhower or Nixon. I can't remember.
But the point is, they almost like 90%, 95% of the time, it's been Democrats.
And certainly in Andrew and my lifetime, they've only been endorsing Democrats.
Well, what that shows is they have an obvious bias toward a certain political perspective.
Clearly.
Yeah. It was Eisenhower they endorsed.
Okay. They're Team Biden. They're Team Democrat. They've been Team Democrat for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And so what Bezos says is we need to be seen as independent. So if you look at, I think it's the second or third paragraph.
Yeah. I want to find that one line.
Yeah.
About you have to believe it's true, even if it is true.
So what Bezos points out is he says that there's two things that are problematic and he points to the fact that polling shows that people don't trust the media. And he says they don't trust the media for two reasons. He says they don't trust the media because they have a negative perception of the media, and they effectively they don't believe the media is telling the truth because of this perception.
Yeah. I'll read it real quick. So voting machines, he's using an analogy. Voting machines must meet two requirements. They must count the vote accurately, and people must believe they count the vote accurately.
Sure.
The second requirement is distinct from and just as important as the first. He's onto something there. What he's missing is that, of course, people don't believe that Washington Post is accurate because they're obviously biased.
Well, what he misses, and it's in the next paragraph, but he points to, he claims that the Post problem is not the first issue, that they're not accurate in counting the votes. He says their problem is people perceive that people aren't believing that they're accurate.
Right.
The reason people aren't believing that they're accurate is because they haven't been accurate in sharing the news. That's the truth.
Yeah, he says it's a bitter pill to swallow, but we are failing on the second requirement, which is to be believed to be accurate.
People will believe you if you're consistently telling the truth. The problem is you have exposed the fact, and the response to this exposes the fact that they're committed to an ideological perspective. They're not committed to just sharing the facts and the truth. Thank you, man. Nothing more. They're committed to pushing. They're activists. They're activists, not journalists. They have a worldview. They want to see politics move this direction to the left and for the causes they support.
Yeah.
And so they write everything with that perspective in place. That's their bias. And people have seen it, and people say, guess what? We don't like it.
So to kind of illustrate why this is our topic and why this is going to be relevant even after the election results are decided is, especially if Kamala wins, but even if Trump wins, do you want your only news source to be this corporate media? Do you want to not be able to, just search up Tim Pool and find out what he's saying, or us and see what we're saying, or any of that? Do you want to have to rely on, Jake Tapper for your news?
Yeah. Or my question is, do you want to be an American who believes in free speech and freedom of the press?
Right.
Or do you want to be some type of authoritarian state where you're not allowed?
Because the fact is, podcasts, and there's left podcasts too, left and right, these are the ones really speaking truth to power. Like the Young Turks, I've never been a big fan of the Young Turks, but Anna Kasparian has recently left the left and is highlighting problems the Democrats have. And Cenk Uygur, who's not left the left, is doing the same thing. And they get a lot of flack from it, from the left, because they're so used to never getting any pushback.
Well, I think too, another bellwether for why more than likely Bezos is going this direction. If you look at the presidential media campaign, it is heavily skewed towards podcasts. I'd say at least 50% of the media appearances have been podcasts.
If you're talking by volume, I think it's overwhelmingly podcasts.
And that's never happened before. It's undeniable that the tides are turning. And it's for these reasons that there is an obvious bias. There is a boys club present. There are narratives that don't get checked. And then there's active trying to destroy the opposition, the ungated podcast area. I do think it's hilarious though. One little aside about the Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness.
Yeah. That's their tagline.
The tagline, the mantra, whatever you might call it. Motto. And there are so many people on the left screaming about Trump's a fascist. Trump's a fascist. Yeah. He's a evil dictator guy. But then you don't endorse the opponent of the fascist.
Right.
And so that means that he's not a fascist, maybe?
Well, it's just so obvious, and ending days of this campaign have all been about Trump is Hitler, Trump is a fascist, Trump supporters are Nazis. And it's just so obviously not true. If you go back to after the Butler assassination attempt where Trump actually was hit on the ear, all these leftists, you know, I don't know if Hillary did, but I think Bill Clinton did. I think all these former presidents did. Joe Biden certainly did. Kamala Harris said, I'm glad he's not dead.
Yeah.
Which is, you wouldn't be if he was Hitler. If he was Hitler, you wouldn't say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do wonder about Jeff Bezos and his authenticity. Clearly, you know, this is an important thing for him. He bought it after all. Mm-hmm. I don't know why he bought it. I don't know why men like Jeff Bezos buy newspapers, you know, other than I have always assumed it probably has something to do with controlling the narrative.
Yeah. I think it's a more less malicious option might be just diversifying your assets. If you have that many billions of dollars, you need to find some company that can hold that value pretty well.
Sure. Well, clearly I do think though that he sees the writing on the wall, I think, and I don't know if this is some kind of a 4D chess move, but I will say this. I believe it's most likely too little too late.
Yeah.
And it's been too many years of doubling down on the leftist agenda. And now when you're going to backpedal and say, hey, we've been wrong this whole time, we've been not journalists, we've been activists, and we're going to try and change that.
Yeah.
Essentially, I mean, he didn't literally say that, but more or less it's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Well, you're alienating the leftist activists, and on the right, we already don't trust. I mean, my assessment is it will take at least a generation to regain trust in the legacy media if it's going to survive.
I think what I'm seeing here is there's actually a shifting of the guard, as it were, for how people are going to consume news.
Absolutely. It's the new media, new landscape.
And so the new media, it's like this to me almost feels like a flailing out. The old man yells at the cloud. Because what's happening is these media outlets, they're legacy media outlets, they'll continue to exist because you'll have billionaire owners like Bezos own them. And so they'll still exist. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of Americans aren't going to these outlets for their news anymore. And so what's happening is it's kind of like print media. When the TV came along and news started happening on TV, fewer people started buying newspapers. Now, did it kill completely newspapers? No. But every town used to have its local newspaper and all this other stuff. That has dwindled considerably. And now
with the internet, who buys a physical copy of a newspaper?
The internet has changed everything. And yes, these media organizations will, I think the vast majority of them, even these old papers now have more subscribers online than actual physical newspaper subscribers.
Yeah.
And then what we're seeing though is the gatekeepers of even the cable media and the network medias, they've fallen behind. And this new emergent podcast sphere where you have long form conversations and real conversations,
we've never in American history had 3 hours of unedited conversation from a former president or presidential candidate like we just did with Joe Rogan and Trump.
Yeah. So that's the new world, and people crave realism or authenticity from their leaders. They want to know, what do you really think? What are you really like? I want to know you as a human being, not just being fed a bunch of these like talking points that politicians are known for, and
or a 60-minute interview with 4 breaks for commercials where they can prep and get ready for the next question.
And the interesting thing about a lot of podcasts is they don't tend to be necessarily hostile venues.
Right? No. Yeah. I fully believe there's been a kerfuffle over Harris not going on Joe Rogan because she wanted him to come to her and only do an hour, and that's just not how he does it.
Yeah.
And he's the interviewer. You invite the person on. And even though I think it would be hilarious if Harris went on and I think she would bomb, I don't think he would try to do gotcha questions or anything. He would ask her, so what was it like growing up in wherever you grew up? And what was that first job you had like?
Middle class.
Yeah. And how much did lawns matter? I think he would ask her genuine questions that you ask someone as you're trying to get to know them. I think she would utterly fail to answer them, but that's on her. That's not on him.
Yeah.
I think it's just a shifting part of the Trump effect. Let's just go back to when he came into the whole political arena. Now he's a tried and true politician of the new variety, I would say. He's kind of broken the game that has existed for generations, you could say, in the whole Washington zone or sphere. He's been the wrecking ball, and it wasn't the same way we envision it, maybe just knocking down a building. It hasn't done that, but what it has done is it's blown a bunch of holes in the system and exposed elements and shown things or how to do things in a way that politicians hadn't been, or they'd ignored, or they'd belittled, or whatever you want to say.
Well, and the control of the narrative has been utterly blown up by podcasts, but specifically podcasts are free to blow up the narrative because Elon Musk bought X, and he says it's the Wild West. You can say whatever you like, and people can community note it, but we're going to leave it up.
Well, but this is this has been the American spirit since America was constructed. Yeah. The notion of the power of the people, truly, and that power is most expressed in your freedom to speak, and that means the freedom of the press. There is no control. The government does not control the press.
Yeah,
and legacy groups, gatekeepers have erected themselves.
Yeah, they're trying to control it.
And they've kind of gotten in bed with Washington, and they've tried to manhandle and control what information or what things are popular, what things are allowed to be said. That has long occurred in our country, but what's happening is that those gatekeepers have been broken, or they've been weakened, and they're flailing a bit. And that's why we get stories like this from the New York Times and this faux, credible source of Media Matters that supposedly is fact checking and watching these conservatives.
Right. Even 5 years ago, this article probably would have done some damage. But today, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, Tim Pool, all these people released, hey, we got this text from New York Times.
Yeah.
They said we're writing this in a collusion with Media Matters. And they wrote these threads, and Tucker Carlson posted what his response was, his tweet text responses, which were F you.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, appropriate.
Quote me is what he said. Be sure to quote me.
And so this article is kind of nothing.
Yeah.
And they have erected themselves as the gatekeepers of what is true and what you're allowed to talk about and what the narrative is. And you can see how much they hate that they're losing that control via this Washington Post thing. 250,000 people have unsubscribed, which is all leftists because no conservatives are unsubscribing. I actually think if you're a conservative who can write and wants to have a journalism job, if you can get a job at WAPO now, do that. Try to recapture the institution. It'll take 20 years, but I think this is a good time to get that groundwork in.
Yeah, well, fair assessment.
Part of the reason they're losing is they ceded the truth a long time ago. Yeah. For example, and we've talked about this multiple times, the whole concept, the nonsense concept of transgenderism, classic example. You've ceded the truth. There are only two genders, scientifically fact.
Yeah.
But you've ceded that because of an agenda. And people are sitting here saying, you can't even tell the truth on the nature of humanity. Right. And you're supposed to tell us.
They've given us just the best response ever when they call us liars is, you believe men can be women.
Yeah.
I don't have to care about anything you say after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So trying to kind of tie this topic up with a bow. So this is the other line from the Jeff Bezos Washington Post article that I think deserves to be read. And it ties into the New York Times trying to shut down all these podcasters. And even, we're probably really, really far down the list, but they would come for us eventually for sure. And he says,
for you, Sterling, only you.
Only me. I accept I'm on several lists already. Anyhow, he says, many people, Jeff Bezos says, many people are turning to off-the-cuff podcasts, inaccurate social media posts, and other unverified news sources, which can quickly spread misinformation and deepen divisions. So even though he's trying to pull back the Washington Post and say, hey, we got to kind of pretend to listen to conservatives and present conservative points of view sometimes, he's still saying all this freedom to say whatever you want and to fact check one another and to not rely on us. That's bad. We got to stop that. So we got to pretend to be more middle of the road so that we can quash these people.
Yeah. Freedom is dangerous.
Yeah.
Sure is.
It's dangerous to tyrants. That's what has always been true.
Yeah. How dare you have to work hard to expose the truth and to make your argument logically, coherently, and have credible sources to back it up. How dare you have to do that?
Yeah.
And, to be fair, are there a lot of podcasts out there just spewing all kinds of crazy theories and conspiracy theories and stuff? Sure. Of course. They exist.
Yeah, but they're not the biggest ones.
Let's look at the record of the Washington Post. Just take them.
Mm-hmm.
They spun for years this notion that Russia colluded with Trump so that Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election.
And they helped quash the Hunter Biden laptop story too.
You know, and New York Times was also involved in this. Now here they are worrying about the spreading of misinformation.
After massive campaigns, those campaigns certainly influenced the election.
Oh yeah. And you want to talk about misinformation? The FBI spreads misinformation. One of the fact checks in one of the debates, I can't remember if it was presidential or vice presidential, was I think it was Trump said crime is down and they fact checked or crime was up and they fact checked him and said crime was down.
And then they backpedaled because it's actually...
Well, no, they never backpedaled. They never had to come back and say, hey, we were wrong about that. Crime is actually up, because the FBI didn't revise that statistic until after the debate. And it was memory hold and no one ever heard about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they had... Originally, it said it was down 2%, but then I think this is between 21 and 22, something like that.
I think it was the year for 22, yeah.
And then it's actually up 4%.
Right, which is, you said it was down a little bit. It's actually up a fair bit.
Yeah.
You know, more than you said it was down. That's a pretty big deal.
But yeah, see, they don't come back and say, hey, you know, if you are a responsible journalist in the spirit of the original craft, you're going to make it a point to come out and be like, guys, we got this wrong.
Yeah.
And you need to know about it.
And they don't do that.
And
they never do that.
Yeah. Own your mistake.
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, we, as human beings, our natural instinct is to cover up when we make a mistake or not admit it.
Right.
And as an institution who's trying to be the effectively arbiter of truth or news, the temptation when that happens to just try to like brush it aside or quietly correct the record is strong. And I think it happens because you're worried, well, if we come out really admitting, oh, we totally blew this, we're going to lose credibility. But the irony is, I think you lose it worse long
you
term
do.
when you don't.
And you know, speaking of credibility, I saw a great example of this recently with Sean Ryan. He came out and released a correction. I don't remember the exact fact about it, but he got a fact wrong about Kamala.
Who is Sean Ryan?
Sean Ryan, the Sean Ryan podcast.
I guess I'm not familiar with him.
He mostly interviews like military veterans or people associated with interesting, like I guess CIA or FBI or he's a special forces guy. I would say he's getting up there in the same levels of like Joe Rogan at this point. He's really gaining a lot of traction. He's becoming really popular. Really cool guy. Highly recommend Sean Ryan's podcast. It's just the Sean Ryan podcast. Go check him out. But he came out and admitted, hey, I got this wrong. And he released a full episode or like a statement.
Correcting the record.
Yeah. And it was about an opponent, you know, Kamala, who he's not for her. He's a conservative guy.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really stand up and awesome. That was an example that I guess the legacy media needs to remember.
Well, they talk all the time about journalistic integrity and like you said, credibility.
Right.
And if you never say, hey, we got this wrong, and it becomes common knowledge that you got it wrong, you lose all credibility, and you certainly never had any journalistic integrity.
Yeah. Or when you make excuses for why you got it wrong. It's just, all it is take journalism, and narrow it down to just your individual, how you make decisions in individual life. And when you make mistakes in individual life and how you own those mistakes and how you apologize for them and you don't make excuses for them. It's the same principle. You're expanding it to a corporation or a business, or in this case, a news media company. You have to have basically the same kind of attitude. Yeah. Because you want people to take you seriously and to trust you. And if you're demonstrating to them that if you get something wrong, you're going to make excuses or deny it or act like it never happened.
Or smear your opponents.
Or call somebody out for actually even noticing, you're going to lose your reputation is going to be
you're sawing the branch you're sitting on.
Right. You're going to have a poor reputation. Yeah.
So that's our topic for today. According to the people who are ruining America, podcasts are ruining America.
Yeah.
So,
and what are podcasts? People talking.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just people talking. They
freedom
don't
of
like free
speech.
speech.
Yeah.
They don't. So if you like free speech, if you want to be able to know what's going on for the next 4 years under whoever won this presidency, never mind. If you want to know what's going on and if you want to, know who to vote for in the next go round in 4 more years, then support podcasts, but specifically support us. We are the Pop Culture Contrarian. This has been our episode for today. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.